The Jewish connection to the land of Israel-Palestine originates back to the birth of the Jewish nation and culture, realized by the creation of the Jewish kingdom, most notably the Kingdom of Judea. Tell me about Palestinian origins, history, and connection to the land.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in the sense that whenever people think about, I certainly see people often like conflate Palestinian nationalism when Palestinian nationalism arose with sort of the history of the people in the region. Probably the earliest history of Arab clans and tribes that are in Palestine today starts around the time of the Haidarite kingdom. So there is this sort of, in a similar sense to how you have, Jacob being the father of, the 12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
The Arab sort of like founding, myth, the patriarch is Ishmael for the Adonites. So we have this idea that, you have Adnan, and those are basically the Arabs that emerged out of the northern part of Arabia and the Middle East. So basically, Naqab, like Negev, Sinai, the Levant sort of region, and they're sort of the descendants of Ishmael. And then you have the Qahtanites, which are seen as the pure Arabs who emerged out of the Yemen in the south of modern day Saudi Arabia, later sort of and in the Hijaz. Arab itself is sort of a meta ethnicity. So you have like the Arabi and the Mustarab, the Arabized. So you have many different sort of groups and peoples that merge into that ethnicity over a period of time. But as far as modern day tribes and clans, and this sort of kept being reflected in the history of the region, even up until sort of the 1800s. So you have the Qaisi-Yemeni conflict. This tribal clan identity is still very present today. So people have maintained a sense of connection to these particular groups and tribes. And I'll tie this, it sort of ties directly into the history of the land. So if you begin with the Adnanites, with Ishmael, Ishmael had many sons. And so Al-Anbat, or Nabat, who is the father of the Nabatians, and Qaidar, or Kedar, who was the first kingdom or tribal confederation in a similar sense to kind of how the ancient kingdom of the Federation of Israel emerged, and then later the Kingdom of Judea.
Could you tell me geographically what were the borders of the Nabatean kingdom, roughly?
Well, so the Qaidarites, the Nabatians sort of took over in a similar sort of region to the Nabatian. The Nabatians sort of took over to a similar sort of region to the Qaidarites. But you're sort of talking about the south of Judah, so modern day, the modern day Negev in Israel, the Sinai, and then when you go over to the Nabatean era, you're looking at like Petra, and they sort of maintain a similar set of borders. So it's that region of like Jordan, the south of modern day Palestine / Israel, and the Sinai region was generally where these people and these tribes were. You see then later like a migration of a lot of these tribes down into the Hijaz, and then obviously some maintained a presence in that area. I think the history of the Middle East in general is one of migrations and people moving based on drought, political war, different political situations and whatnot. But I guess sort of the origins of a lot of these cultures and civilization culture is in these regions, the desert areas of the Sinai, the Negev, and that was sort of like the early beginning of the Arab identity. The Ishmaelites descendants, basically through Adnan, then migrate into the Hijaz. There's sort of a conflict with the Yemenites and sort of a merging of identity, and that's when you get this like Hijaz era of Arab identity. And that's why people keep like referring to the Hijaz as sort of like the origins of an Arab presence in the land, even though Arabs have been all over the Middle East for a very, very long time. Now those same tribes are still there today, and not only are they still there today, but they are aware of their origins. So people are aware of whether they're from an Azadi or a Qahtani tribe, and indeed this was the source of a lot of our politics. Whether you have a lot of families that are from a Qaisi Yemeni conflict,
Hmm.
So they either identify as being Adonite or Qahtanite. And then you have other families that sort of pick the alliance, so kind of like the Barghouthis, who kind of come later, pick a side as needed.
Could you tell me roughly when the Barghouthis came to the land of Israel Palestine,
The
or
story is
any of the other
something like,
tribes?
yeah, so the story is something like, for the Barghouthis are a particularly interesting case. It's about 1,000 years ago. But I'd say modern day Palestinians emerge out of all sorts of different groups. Predominantly, though, you're looking at Adnanite Arab tribes and Qahtani Arab tribes. So they're predominantly Arab in their ethnicity and identity. And these migrations happen in multiple periods. So you have a period, a period of just there's a sort of a founder effect in the region in general. So the population varied over time of modern day Israel Palestine. But you have tribes that are sort of maintained a presence on the land continuously, and even people who are descendants of ethnically Jewish people that converted to Christianity and later Islam. You then have a Sassanid migration and obviously the Islamic conquest in the 7th century.
Hmm.
And some of the clan mindset and awareness of your tribe is still fairly a fairly prevalent thing in the region. So people are aware of the sort of clans that represent different areas. So
So
beyond
the
sort of like the
clans
high.
in the land predated the Islamic conquest. Some of the tribes in this land.
Some of the tribes predated the Islamic conquest, and different tribes were sort of known for different regions. So, like Banu
Hmm.
Ghassan are known for a particular region in the Middle East and had a fairly prevalent sort of Christian kingdom inside Palestine, Syria, and a lot of areas in the Levant. Other tribes, are where some modern day Bedouins can trace their ancestry to. And you also have recent immigrants. It's not like you didn't have people come in through the Ottoman era or the Rashidun era, and significant population through the Islamic conquest in the 7th century. And different tribes sort of all know their ancestry and presence of the land. And the fairly notable families, most people are fairly aware of their origins. They say Danis, the Husseinis, the Tamimis, the Tuqans, the Jarrars.